This morning I'm reading the first part of the story of the walk to Emmaus, which occurred on the same day that the women went to the tomb with the spices they had prepared, and they found the stone was rolled away from the tomb. This scripture comes from the 24th chapter of Luke, verses 13 through 27. Now on the same day, two of them were going to a village called Emmaus, about 7 miles from Jerusalem, and talking with each other about all these things that had happened. While they were walking and discussing, Jesus himself came near and went with them, but their eyes were kept from recognizing him. And he said to them, "What are you discussing with each other while you walk along?" They stood still, looking sad. Then one of them, whose name was Cleopas, answered him, "Are you the only stranger in Jerusalem who does not know the things that have taken place there in these days?" He asked them, "What things?" They replied, "The things about Jesus of Nazareth, who was a prophet mighty in deed and word before God and all the people. And now our chief priests and leaders handed him over to be condemned to death and crucified him. But we had hoped that he was the one to redeem Israel. Yes, and besides all this, it is now the 3rd day since these things took place. Moreover, some women of our group astounded us. They were at the tomb early this morning, and when they did not find his body there, they came back and told us that they had indeed seen a vision of angels who said that he was alive. Some of those who were with us went to the tomb and found it just as the women had said, but they did not see him." Then he said to them, "Oh, how foolish you are, and how slow of heart to believe all that the prophets have declared. Was it not necessary that the Messiah should suffer these things and then enter into his glory?" Then, beginning with Moses and all the prophets, he interpreted to them the things about himself in all the scriptures.
Now continuing the story of the walk to Emmaus, the book of Luke, chapter 24, verses 28 through 35. As they came near the village to which they were going, he walked ahead as if he were going on, but they urged him strongly, saying, "Stay with us, because it is almost evening, and the day is now nearly over." So we went in to stay with them. When he was at the table with them, he took bread, blessed and broke it, and gave it to them. Then their eyes were opened, and they recognized him, and he vanished from their sight. They said to each other, "Were not our hearts burning within us while he was talking to us on the road, while he was opening the scriptures to us?" That same hour, they got up and returned to Jerusalem, and they found the 11 and their companions gathered together. They were saying, "The Lord is risen indeed, and he has appeared to Simon." Then they told what had happened on the road and how he had been made known to them in the breaking of the bread.
May God bless the reading, hearing, and understanding of these words this morning. Two people walking down the road, talking with each other, going to this place called Emmaus. We don't know why they're walking to Emmaus. We just know that they are on this road. And one thing that we need to remember that Shirley brought up this morning is that this is still the day of resurrection, Easter. We have gone through 2 weeks since that special morning, but these two travelers are still in that day, the day the tomb was found empty. They had been told about the tomb by the women who came excited and gave them the news. In the verses before our text this morning, the women came in, letting them know what they had seen, that they had seen visions of angels. But as it was written in Luke 24:11, but these words seemed to them an idle tale, and they did not believe them. So we have two people walking in disbelief, walking in ignorance, walking in not knowing exactly what is going on. They might be walking, trying to get away from Jerusalem, to get away from everything that was going on there. They might be walking just because they need to clear their heads. It had been a long morning. Or they might be walking because they have something that they need to do in Emmaus. We will never know because it never says. But as they walk down this road, they encounter someone who asks them exactly what they're talking about. Now, as the readers of this scripture and us who stand back looking down upon this story, we know who this person is. We know that this is Jesus walking up to these two travelers, asking them a question, seeing how they respond and how they react. But they don't know who this is. And they don't recognize him. And so they respond in amazement that there is actually somebody in this general vicinity that has no idea what has just gone on. What went on 3 days ago? What went on that morning? They don't understand how this could happen. The irony of this entire thing is that the stranger, this person who is not recognized by our two travelers, is being accused of not knowing what it is that was going on. But it is the travelers who didn't understand, who didn't know what was going on. It is the stranger who they say don't know what's going on, who knows exactly what is going on. And Jesus then explains to them, explains to the travelers what it was that was going on. He interprets the scriptures for them, giving them back the scriptures of the prophecies, of the stories that has been told, asking them how you don't get it, hoping that they will realize what has happened and how that will affect the world. But at this moment, they don't. They just can't see. And so as they continue along their walk, they reach the village Emmaus. And they stop and prepare to spend the night. But Jesus, the stranger, keeps walking ahead. He was going to go about the rest of his day, about his travels, but the two stopped, invited him to stay with them. And in fact, they urged him to stay. The three sit down at table, and we're beginning to have a meal, beginning to share this time together. And it was at this time that Jesus took the bread, he blessed it, he broke it, and he gave it to them. These are words that we know well. These are words that are recited each and every week in our service. But today, this morning, these are words that are not of the Eucharist. They are not of the meal that we partake of each and every week. This is just an ordinary, plain meal. Two people inviting a stranger for a bite to eat. And suddenly their eyes were open, and they knew who it was sitting across from them, sharing a meal from them, and like that, he was gone. Once the two realized that it was Jesus, they quickly thought back and remembered to the conversation and took account of their feelings that they were having during that conversation as Jesus was explaining the scriptures and the prophecies to them, knowing how they felt as everything became clear. Their hearts burned as they understood what was going on. It's a nice story. It's a wonderful story. It's a good way to help us understand 2 weeks after the fact that on the day of Easter, in this text, Jesus is among the people. He is indeed in the world, and he was still doing what it was he was doing before the crucifixion. Teaching the word and sharing a meal with those whom he saw. And so what this story is a story about hospitality. A story about opening up yourselves and everything that you have and inviting those in. Walking up to a stranger whom you might not recognize and opening your life and sharing with them. And then by doing so, gaining insight into the world, and more importantly, gaining insight into the thoughts, the mind, and the actions of Jesus the Christ. For it took the three of them to come together to understand what was written in the Scriptures. It took them coming together to eat and to share and to talk back and forth to see who it was that the two travelers were hosting, until an offer of sharing and acceptance, their eyes were closed to the sight of Christ. They were unable to recognize the person in front of them, and they were unable to understand what was written and how it was to be interpreted. So before we go along, I want to tell you a real quick story. A typical day at Phillips Theological Seminary. Now, I'm not sure how many of you have pictured, maybe during the sermons, what a day at Phillips Theological Seminary would be. But before I went, I did. And I pictured it as just a typical college class. The students sitting down, the professor standing up there writing a tremendous amount and lecturing as the students took their notes, and every now and then, just to make sure, flipping through the Bible to see exactly where the professor still was. But that was not the case all of the time. There were some classes that were like that, but most of the time it wasn't. What would happen is that the professor, the learned person in the Bible, in my Christian Testament class, it was Dr. Dennis Smith, who taught me so much. And Dr. Smith would sit there, and he would write on the whiteboard, let's just take this, Matthew 24, 13 through 35. And he would turn to the class, and he would say, "What is going on?" And then a discussion would take place. And when we got things completely wrong, he would step in. But most of the time, he stood back and he let us have conversation with each other. At times, these discussions would get heated, words would get yelled back and forth, and they would making sure that the other person knew your thoughts, knew your position, knew why you were right and they were wrong. But most of the time, it was just a conversation, hearing. And even today, as I go to conferences like the one at Phillips or like General Assembly, you meet with the other ministers. You sit down and you discuss theology. Now, I guarantee this is not for everyone, but it's fun, and I enjoy doing it. And so as I go through to those conferences, or even as I walk through my day-to-day life and people find out I'm a minister, and undoubtedly there are questions that they have for me. It's fun to sit and to talk and to discuss, because through conversation comes knowledge and a better understanding of the Scriptures. Because as we each read the Bible on our own and we interpret the Scriptures for ourselves, we put in our own experiences, our own thoughts, our own worldview, and we miss out on a few things. But when we discuss it in open conversation with one another, peacefully talking, keeping our voices at a normal register, we can learn. Because no one is going to have the same experiences that you do. No one is going to have the same exact world thought that you do. And from that, you hear their words, their interpretations, and it strengthens your words and your interpretations. Because as we see this morning, even those who traveled with Jesus, who was with Jesus, who heard Jesus preach about how he had to die, how he had to be raised, how this was going to happen, they still disbelieved. We're not going to get it right on our own. It takes conversation. This is why we meet. This is why we come together each and every Sunday as a community, as people with different thoughts, different experiences, to understand, to gain knowledge about the Scriptures, about ourselves, and about what we are being asked to do and to be in God's creation. It is in the mundane, ordinary, everyday life that we learn from each other, so that we can use the thoughts and the understandings of everyone to shape our faith and to understand the Scriptures. It is through walking down the road with someone else, with sharing a meal with someone, or just sitting down and having a conversation that strengthens our faith. No one is ever perfect. No one is ever always correct. But as a community, we can come together to work to try our best to understand. Through the acceptance of strangers, we welcome Jesus into our community. Because when we welcome others and accept others, we welcome and accept Christ. Because for them, whether we recognize Christ or not, we can always look back afterwards. We can always feel the burning within our hearts as we talk, as we converse, as we share a meal that helps our faith, and our interpretation. And so the wonderful thing, the beautiful thing about the Scriptures this morning comes in the form of the characters. There were three: Jesus, Cleopas, and the other one. The other one is never mentioned by name, and therefore we don't know who they are. The other one could be a woman, could be a child, could be a man. We don't know. I think the author does this on purpose. Because as we read a text and it labels each and every person, we stay back at afar, watching over. But if there is a character there without a name, without an identity, we can place ourselves in that character to learn from that character and to understand what went on with that character. As we read this text this morning, put yourself in the shoes of the other person. To feel, to see, to understand what it means to accept this stranger that's just walking down the road. To invite him into your life and to understand that from that invitation comes knowledge and faith. Hospitality opened the eyes of the two travelers, and Jesus was revealed. What can offering hospitality to others reveal to us? Jesus, on this path, did not force himself upon the other two. Instead, he started walking away, waiting to be invited in. And from the breaking of the bread, he was made known to them. Not a special meal, just a meal. And from after that, the two ran off, sharing what they had learned, sharing their understanding, sharing the new interpretation. We can't wait for Jesus to come to us. We have to invite him in. We have to actively seek him out, actively go into this community and see Jesus in the face and the actions and the words and the deeds of everyone, and invite them in. Invite them to share a meal. So this morning, I will offer up a challenge to you. You don't have to take it, but I do hope some of you will. We are together this morning in community with one another. Each and every week, we join together in this community to listen, to share, and to better understand each other, and through that, better understand ourselves. Now, our community is not that big, and this morning is a little less than normal. But we all know people in this community, and some we know much better than others. And so while we gather in McGinnis Fellowship Hall this morning, try sharing that meal, the ordinary weekly meal of donuts, broken together with someone that you don't know very well this morning. Listen to them. Learn from them. Understand them better. Understand yourself better. And then go out into the world and share with others all that you have learned about them, about yourself, about the Scriptures, and about the ever-living Christ among us. Amen.